Hello, and welcome to another video. I have my candle warming lamp here, and in it we have spiced apple toddy. Today I'm going to take you through my second bookshelf. This is the second of my two bookshelves, 1, 2, and we'll start at the top today, I think, and work our way down. So, thought I'd give it some mood lighting with the candle melting on the side as we look at some moody books. So, up top here in the far corner, we have the Twilight Saga. So, we have Breaking Dawn, Eclipse, New Moon, Twilight, and then a special edition of Twilight. It's a cloth-bound edition that I got as a Christmas present many years ago. And they sit up here in the top corner. I haven't reread them in quite a while. I've been tempted to a few times. The only one not accounted for up here is Midnight Sun. Actually, I guess there are a couple actually not accounted for. Midnight Sun being the most recent. That's Edward's point of view of the events of Twilight. Also not accounted for is Life and Death, I believe is what it's called, which is the gender-bent version that Stephanie Meyer published as some sort of gotcha towards people who argue that her story is misogynistic. I think her argument was it's the same story regardless of gender, but I haven't read it, so I don't think I can judge that. And then one more that's not there is, I don't remember the exact title, The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner, I believe is what it's called. And that is a novella about a very minor character from Eclipse. So I have the bulk of the saga there, but not everything. I do have Midnight Sun on ebook because I didn't want to actually own it. I really wanted to read it, but I didn't really care to own it, a physical copy. Beside Twilight, we have another YA vampire romance. This is Vampire Academy. There are 6 books in this series. We have Vampire Academy, Frostbite, Shadow Kiss, Blood Promise, Spirit Bound, and Last Sacrifice. So this is a series I read in late elementary school when I was in about grade 7 and 8, and maybe a little bit into grade 9, into high school. So this series follows a girl named Rose and her best friend, who is a vampire heiress type. Rose is half vampire. She's a Dampier, I believe. I could be misremembering. And she's basically born to be a bodyguard, essentially, a vampire bodyguard to her best friend, who's this heiress. And throughout the series, they deal with these other vampire types who are sort of too far gone in their bloodlust. They're like, I don't know how to describe it. They're sort of corrupt beings. But it also follows Rose and her romance with her teacher. This is a student-teacher romance situation happening. I believe Rose is of age. That's important to note, but yeah, different times in early YA, I feel like. Been a long time since I've read these as well, but I might revisit them someday. I know there was a recent television series adaptation, I think on Peacock or Paramount or somewhere. I don't think it did well. I think it got canceled. There was also a short-lived movie series. They only did one movie it did not do well either, so I don't know if there's a place in this world for a Vampire Academy adaptation, but it lives there beside Twilight in my vampire nostalgia corner. Beside these, I have my bobblehead of Fox Mulder from the X-Files, and behind him is my X-Files mug. He lives up here next to my nonfiction section, my very small nonfiction section. So up here we have Twin Peaks, The Secret History of Twin Peaks. This is sort of an not quite in universe, but it's not about the show, but it has little bits and pieces of the story from the show. So fake documents, diary entries, that sort of thing. It's a sort of a tie-in novel. And in the front little sleeve, I have a bookmark that I got off Etsy. It says, Missing Laura Palmer. So Laura Palmer is one of the main characters from Twin Peaks, and she is found dead in the first episode. And the show takes off from there. One of my favorite shows. I've rewatched it a couple times. Really enjoy it. I recommend if you want a sort of out there, procedural drama, a little bit of comedy, set in a small town where things are what they seem. You gotta be okay with some weird stuff, though. David Lynch likes to do a lot of dreamlike filmmaking, so nothing is necessarily straightforward in his work. Next to it we have Not the Life It Seems, which is a My Chemical Romance biography. So it's a history of the band, about how they became a band, the success they had, and then why they broke up. Really, really good read. It's by a journalist who interviewed them a number of times and sort of had a lot of access to the band. Really, really interesting read. Beside that, we have Where There's Smoke. So this relates to our friend Fox here. This is a biography of the actor who plays the cigarette-smoking man in The X-Files. His name suddenly escapes me, but let's look. William B. Davis. He's a Canadian actor, most well-known, I think, for playing the cigarette-smoking man. Beside that, we have a book called Walls. So I read this for a German history course I took. It's about a woman in Nazi Germany who, as it says, resisted the Third Reich. It's a really interesting, compelling memoir. I recommend. And it's not too long, it's very well paced. Beside that, we have The Princess Diarist. This is Carrie Fisher's memoir. One of her memoirs, specifically about her time in Star Wars and sort of what that film series and what that role did for her, and the dalliances that were going on behind the scenes between her and Harrison Ford. Really interesting read. She's a really, really compelling writer. I recommend. Beside that, we have Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. This is about sort of the going-ons behind the scenes in not just Hollywood, but sort of everywhere. The lies, spies, and conspiracy to protect predators. So a lot of that pertains to Hollywood. A lot of that pertains to specifically the Harvey Weinstein cases. Really interesting read. Also just very troubling, the content, so can be a tricky read at times. Beside that, we have Richard Ayoade on Ayoade, A Cinematic Odyssey. So in this, Richard Ayoade, who is a English comedian and filmmaker. He interviews himself about filmmaking, about cinema, and it's really interesting. He's a very, very kind of odd comedian, but he's one of my favorites. Love watching him on Big Fat Quiz, on 8 of 10 Cats Does Countdown. He does a lot of great panel show appearances. And then beside that we have Jim Henson's biography. Really interesting man, very much a ambitious. You know, he didn't like to stand still. He always wanted to move on to the next thing and innovate. And I think he's a very, very creative, talented man. So that's my little nonfiction section. We'll move down to our next shelf and we'll scoot over here. Here we have what I would describe as my classics-ish section. So we have some James Joyce, we have Dubliners. So I read this in a first-year English course in university. It's a series of short stories, all set, not necessarily in Dublin, but about people from Dublin. So James Joyce is an Irish writer from, I think, the early 20th century is mostly when he was writing. I could be wrong, it's been a long time. Let's see what kind of information we can get here. So, James Joyce was born in Dublin on February 2nd, 1882. He was the oldest of 10 children in a family that, after brief prosperity, collapsed into poverty. In 1902, following his graduation from University College Dublin, he went to Paris, where he devoted himself to writing poems and prose sketches, and to formulating an aesthetic system. So, he was mostly working in that early 20th century. And as much as he, I think, I don't want to ascribe too much meaning, but you know, he left Dublin, but only ever really wrote about Dublin and about being Irish and about Ireland. So, really interesting writer. Another novel of his, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. So I still haven't read, I'll be honest. But I love these two Penguin Classics Deluxe Editions. Both of these are centennial anniversaries of his novels. And I was rather disappointed that, and I don't think still, Penguin has released a centennial anniversary edition of Ulysses by James Joyce. I really wanted a matched set to go with these because I think they just look so nice. I love the little portraits of James Joyce there, and I just think they make a really nice set. So we have our James Joyce section. Up here we have a novel by Louisa May Alcott, who you may know as the author of Little Women. But she also wrote this novel, A Long Fatal Love Chase. He stalked her every step, for she had become his obsession. This is a really interesting novel. Still haven't read it, I'll be honest, but I did start it at one point. This woman basically chased across Europe by a man. And it's just really, really interesting idea that the author of Little Women also wrote a novel like this, a thriller. Like, I think that's really interesting. So, eventually gonna dig into that one. Below this Louisa May Alcott book, we have my, I'm actually missing a few. Some of my books are in my kind of to-be-read pile, so we are missing a few here, but my Shirley Jackson section. So what's not here is, oh, you know what? It's because one's over here, but Bird's Nest by Shirley Jackson is another one I have. But this is one of my favorites. This is We've Always Lived in the Castle. It's another Penguin Classic edition. So this one's, Shirley Jackson is an excellent thriller horror writer. And so this novel is about two sisters who live in their dilapidated family home after their family sort of mysteriously died. And we have an unreliable narrator. We have, you know, she has her own way of looking at the world that isn't straightforward and doesn't really align with the way others see the world or see her family. So she's very superstitious. She has these, what's the word? Not compulsions necessarily, but she'll do these sort of superstitious, what's the word? Like rituals. She has her own rituals that she performs that somehow have meaning or purpose to her. Like if I do this, then this will happen, or this will protect us, or what have you. So really interesting character. And the town that they live in sort of ostracizes them and doesn't understand her and her sister. So really interesting book, I recommend. Really good for like a spooky season. Beside that, we have Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. This is a Hercule Poirot novel. I think I love Hercule Poirot and I love Agatha Christie. So, not my favorite Poirot, not my favorite Agatha Christie, but a very fun one. I think my favorite might still be The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I think that's an excellent one. And then beside that, we have Babylon Berlin. So this, I actually loaned to my dad most recently when we were traveling last year. I brought a couple books for, because I knew we were going to be in the airport for a while. And so he read this and he said it was really good and that he would read the sequel. But I bought this because there's a show that I discovered on Netflix that's a German-made television series that Netflix just happened to have streaming called Babylon Berlin, that one of my film professors actually either told me about or somehow it came up. I feel like he must have told me. And so I watched it and it was excellent. And he's German, so he knows. And we were taking a German film course from him at the time. So I watched it and it was excellent. Really loved it. It's essentially a police procedural set in the Weimar Republic of Germany. So the time between the wars in Germany, at least between World War I and Hitler coming into power. So there's debauchery, there's excessive drinking and sex work, and things are in upheaval in Germany this time. There's a fear of communism, and communism is entering Germany. And then there's a lot of political upheaval with that. And so there are these conspiracies at play here. We have our main character who's a detective investigating these murders. It's a very, very fun show that I recommend. And I think a new season came out a little while ago in Germany, and it might now be streaming in Canada. So I'm gonna tuck that away for later. I'm gonna hopefully find that new season and watch it. Next we have Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, Canadian author. Another one that I've started and not finished. It's, to be fair, a dense book. I made it that far in. I think it's about 100, 200 pages in about 800 page novel. Let's see how far I got. Where's my bookmark? Let's see. Not quite there. But let's say about, between 100 and 200 pages in. Essentially this jumps between this elderly woman sort of retelling her youth and reminiscing, and it cuts between that and a fictional sci-fi novel that I think is written by a character in the book. So really strange storytelling, I'll be honest, but interesting. So it's one I'd have to kind of dig back into and kind of get hooked into again, but really interesting. Beside that, we have my Mona Awad little section. I think there's something missing. Oh, so Bunny by Mona Awad I have in a different shelf. That stays in my my Dark Academia shelf, and then these two I still have to read. But we have Rouge by Mona Awad. This is sort of a Beauty and the Beast kind of vibe, a dark fairy tale So Mona Wad is sort of an interesting literary fiction writer, like very stylized and also very obscure. Like things are obscured. Nothing is necessarily straightforward or made completely known to the reader. It's sort of, I don't know, ephemeral what's going on, but I enjoy it. So let's read about this. Belle is obsessed with beauty, just like her estranged mother. So immediately we're getting Beauty and the Beast. Just like her estranged mother, Noelle. When Noelle mysteriously dies, Belle returns to Southern California, grappling with the lingering questions surrounding her mother's death. Soon after the funeral, a cryptic video about a transformative spa experience lures Belle to La Maison de Méduse, the same lavish culty spa to which her mother was devoted. There, Belle discovers the frightening secret behind her obsession with her reflection and what lurks beyond the glass, also getting sort of a Snow White, Fairest of Them All vibe. With black humor and seductive horror, Rouge holds a warped mirror to our relationship with mortality, the cult-like nature of the beauty industry, and the danger of internalizing its pitiless gaze. So, getting a bit of the substance vibe as well. And I'll be honest, this actually reminds me of the premise of a Twilight fanfic I once read. That's funny, but yeah, what seems really interesting, I think this is or was adapted into a movie. I could be wrong, but I thought I heard something about that. Anyway, it sounds excellent. And then we have All's Well by Mona Wad. So this one is another sort of offbeat, interesting one. Miranda Fitch's life is a waking nightmare. The accident that ended her burgeoning acting career left her with excruciating chronic pain, a failed marriage, and a deepening dependence on painkillers. And now she's on the verge of losing her job as a college theater director. Determined to put on Shakespeare's All's Well That Ends Well, the play that promised and cost her everything, she faces a mutinous cast hell-bent on staging Macbeth instead. Miranda sees her chance at redemption slip through her fingers. That's when she meets three strange benefactors who have an eerie knowledge of Miranda's past and a tantalizing promise for her future. I'll interject here. Very Macbeth sounding, isn't it? One where the show goes on, her rebellious students get what's coming to them, and the invisible doubted pain that's kept her from the spotlight is made known. A potent, subversive novel, All's Well is the story of a woman at her breaking point, and a formidable, piercingly funny indictment of our collective refusal to witness and believe female pain. So another interesting novel. I have a tendency, as you might notice, to buy books that I am really interested in and then put them in my shelf and not read them. It's something I'm trying to work on. It's sort of one of my goals every year is to read more of what I already own and buy less, but I've done okay this year, I will say. So, because I'm missing a few books, they sort of don't stand up on their own very well. Here we have another Shirley Jackson. So she is kept separate sometimes because it doesn't match my lovely editions here, but I might scoot her back over. So this is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So if you know the Netflix show, this is very different off the bat, almost completely different premise. This is about a group of, like, there's a researcher and some sort of hired on help to stay in this haunted house, and things sort of go awry. You know, the scariest parts aren't really that there's like big jumpy scare bits. It's more the imagined horrors are worse than what's actually happening, kind of thing. Like the imagination creates scarier things than what reality is. So this is about 4 seekers have arrived at the rambling old pile known as Hill House. Dr. Montague, an occult scholar looking for solid evidence of psychic phenomena, Theodora, his lovely and light-hearted assistant, Luke, the adventurous future inheritor of the estate, and Eleanor, a friendless, fragile young woman with a dark past. As they begin to cope with chilling, even horrifying occurrences beyond their control or understanding, they cannot possibly know what lies ahead. For Hill House is gathering its powers, and soon it will choose one of them to make its own. So, definitely, scary in a quiet kind of, it's obvious to say, but haunting way. Very different from the show, but equally worth checking out. We'll move up here briefly. So this is a novel called Tidal Creatures by Shauna Maguire. This is a sequel to their novel Middle Game, which is one of my absolute favorite books. They're set in the same universe, but Tidal Creatures is a new story. So one I'm excited to dig into. I did start it briefly just to kind of get a sense, but I need to finish it still, so looking forward to that. And it's a hard one to explain, so I'm not gonna try. And I just realized Middle Game is another one I usually keep in my Dark Academia shelf, but I had started to reread it, so if you haven't seen that book in my videos, that is why. It's off somewhere else. This is actually a literary journal, magazine, even if you will, that I purchased. I have sort of an online acquaintance that was published in this. I think the first thing she ever got published. And it's a odd little story that's hard to explain. But it's essentially filled with different literary contributions of odd stories that maybe don't get the same attention in other literary journals. So it's called God's Cruel Joke. This is the first volume, first issue. I think somewhere, I want to see if it has an explanation. Here, let's look. The inaugural issue of God's Cruel Joke, a literary magazine dedicated to the propagation of thought-provoking works of written words that focus on the uncanny intersection of the profound and the profane, the pieces that carelessly ride on the edge of acceptable expression. God's Cruel Joke features work from a diverse group of contributors, both established and upcoming. So, I think that gives you an idea of the profound and the perverse. Really interesting works in there. Some little short stories, some a little longer, some almost poems. Really, really strange and off-putting in a great way. Next we have This Is How You Lose the Time War. So this is a novella that I heard talked about so much online, and then I had two separate friends tell me how good it was. So it's one that I picked up later, I think, than most, but it's excellent. I think there was a time online, like in a year or two ago, where this really popped off again. So I think a lot of people have discovered it. But it's essentially a science fiction story told through letters, but they're not always letters. They're I don't know how to describe it. These otherworldly ways of communicating between two people on opposite sides of a war. And it's a love story. So really, really compelling. It's literary fiction, so it's very, like, the prose is beautiful. It's really, really well written. I recommend checking it out. It's very short, but it's just a gorgeously written story. Beside that, we have I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. So this is one that's sort of a coming of age novel set. I want to say, what is this set? I want to say the 20s or the 30s. About a girl and her family. It's like her mother and her her sister and her father and her stepmother living in a dilapidated house. Her father's sort of a writer who's sort of, I don't know if he was successful at one point and has sort of lost that success and is struggling to be a writer. And their encounters with this family that moves in nearby, these Americans that they meet. Really interesting coming of age story. I think I watched, there's like a movie adaptation with, I think Henry Cavill is in it, and some other actors who I don't recall, but really, really nice story. It's been a while since I read it, but I remember really enjoying it. Now we have another one that's been a long time since I read, but Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I remember when I was 18, this really hit, you know. I was going into university, and the main characters here are in their first year of college because it's American. Very compelling, but at the time for me, like, it really hit. It's been a long time since I read it. Might be one, I don't know if I'll ever revisit it, but I hold on to it for nostalgia. Next, so we're getting to my contemporary section, and then my like straight contemporary romance, and then the weird stuff. So this is Emergency Contact. This is a really cute, I'd say new adult romance about two strangers who somehow become each other's emergency contacts, and they're both sort of going through their own independent problems, but find each other in that moment, and it's very sweet. It's a sweet story. I'm just gonna scoot this up here. So next we're getting into just the romance, and if you can tell me what these three novels have in common, then we should be friends. So this is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. Very cute, very, very light. It's a little silly, like it leans a little on the silly side for my tastes, but it's very fun and very cute, so I hold on to it still. Essentially, a woman in need of a place to live finds a deal that's too good to be true, you know, really well priced apartment, and this is her roommate, who she eventually discovers is a vampire. Very, very cute romance. Next we have You Again by Kate Goldbecker. This is a wonderful, wonderful novel that is essentially a gender bent When Harry Met Sally. So good. It's of all of these, probably my favorite on this shelf easily. So it follows them throughout the years, throughout, you know, being at odds with each other, being friends, being more. It's just lovely, lovely, lovely book. And then we have The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. A ton of fun, this one. I'd say probably because it was the first, it's my favorite of her novels. They do, well, I might take that back, because there is one that she wrote that I enjoy quite a bit. Maybe on par with this one. I think, what was it called? Love Theoretically, I think is what it was called. And I really enjoyed that one, I'll be honest. But this one holds a special place in my heart. And so, if you didn't know, these three books are all inspired by Kylo Ren and Rey from Star Wars. These two specifically were originally written as fan fiction. This one, I believe, was written later, but still inspired by, but not originally a fanfic. I read this one as a fanfic, and it was excellent then, and it's still excellent now. And it's actually quite funny reading this, because for the most part, I didn't really see the connection. Like, a lot of it has been rewritten from the original fanfic, and I think for the better. I think when they're rewritten properly as original fiction, they read a lot better. They're much more refined, and they work better. But there are some scenes in this that triggered my memory of being like, I've read this before. This whole scene, I feel like I remember. So, excellent book. Excellent. I think it's so fun when I find a romance novel and immediately just looking at it, I can say, that was a Reylo fanfic. Next up, we have this Four Horsemen series. So this is a romance series with each book about a different horseman of the apocalypse. They're very silly, I'll be honest with you. They're not serious, but they had me, all right? I wanted to read a romance, and they were there for me. So we have pestilence, war, famine, and death. So each one is about a different horseman and a different woman a certain number of years into the apocalypse. So the apocalypse starts with the first horseman, pestilence, and it continues on through the years with a new horseman arriving at each point. They're very fun. My favorite is famine. Yeah, they're a fun time. They're nothing too serious. But if you want some kind of, not necessarily trashy, but a little trashy, enemies to lovers vibe, these have you. So up top here we have another novel called The 14th Letter. It's a murder mystery, and it might be a time loop, and I'll be honest, another one I haven't read. But really, really interesting. It's a one that I saw the premise and I was immediately taken by. So let's read it. I'll try and get it a bit more light here. Feels like less light. One balmy June evening in 1881, Phoebe Stanbury stands before the guests of her engagement party. This is her moment when she'll join the renowned Raycraft family. As she takes her fiancé's hand, a stranger with a knife steps forward and ends the poor girl's life. Amid the chaos, he turns to her groom and mouths, "I promised I would save you." Very intriguing. What does it mean? We'll find out. Okay. Moving on. Here we have The Taxidermist's Daughter by Katie Mose. So this is another kind of spooky, atmospheric novel. A bit mysterious. So 1912. A Sussex churchyard. Villagers gather on the night when the ghosts of those who will not survive the coming year are thought to walk in the shadows. A woman lies dead. It's a little spooky. A little gothic. Very exciting. Beside that, we have two Neil Gaiman novels. We have American Gods and Good Omens, which is co-written with Terry Pratchett. American Gods I really enjoyed quite a lot. It's sort of a big, almost travel novel. It's a saga. It's really, really interesting, mythologizing. And The Good Omens is very British, very kind of satirical humor. It's very fun as well. Then we have a novel called, or novella, I think, or no, it's short stories. It's short stories. It's a collection of short stories by Sydney Warner Bruman. I think they now go by Sydney Heagle, I think is how you pronounce it. So I went to university with them, and this is their first short story publication that I got. Really, really atmospheric, spooky short stories about a small Ontario town. Very good stuff. Then we have Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. It's about two sisters who grow up as witches. And they sort of are at odds with each other throughout their life, and they're sort of ostracized by their community for being different and for being, suspected as witches. They don't really practice very much. And so they grow up sort of at odds with each other. They're very different people, and then later in adulthood come back together because one of them is in trouble and needs the other's help. Really good for an autumn or summertime, I think. And we'll just scoot down here. And this is the graphic novel comic book section. So I'll try and go maybe more quickly through these. We have The Winter Soldier, Captain America. So these tie-ins. This is the run of Captain America that the Winter Soldier film is based on mostly. So it's about Bucky coming back as the Winter Soldier and how Cap deals with all that. Next up, we have Civil War. So these lead right into that Civil War storyline from the comics that the films also did. A Black Widow comic, Silk, which is she's one of like the spider people. It's It's one that I thought started really well, but I didn't like where it went, so I stopped reading it. You have two Poe Dameron Star Wars comics. Again, I kind of liked it to begin with, but then it sort of lost me, and I didn't really love the characterization. Young Avengers, which is by Kieran Gillen. Very fun. It's solid. Not one I've revisited, really. We have Matt Faction's Hawkeye. Loved this version of Hawkeye. He really is sort of the gold standard, I feel like, for Hawkeye, and sort of my only point of reference for comic Hawkeye, but I really, really love it. I love the art style. I don't know if you can see, oh wait, I'll look behind Hawkeye here for who the artist was. I think there's a few artists listed there. But yeah, excellent, excellent comic. Make sure Hawkeye can stand there, okay. Forgot to show you, I got a little Winter Soldier there, little Cap Funko, and little Hawkeye, and another Captain America there. Then we have Fatale by Ed Brubaker. It's one I still actually haven't read. But I love the vibes, and I love like an old Hollywood kind of vibe. Another Ed Brubaker series, so I think these Captain Americas are also by Ed Brubaker. Kill or Be Killed, which is a series I started a number of years ago and never really quite got into fully, so I still have them, but not one I've really kept up with. Then we have Paper Girls, which is by, oh goodness, what's his name? Vaughn. Oh, I've lost it. Brian K. Vaughan, yeah. Really, it's a pretty concise series. Like, it's only these, 6 issues? Or 6 collected volumes, I should say. Really interesting science fiction story about these paper girls who end up time traveling, exploring kind of different universes and dimensions. Really, really interesting. It's sort of, it didn't conclude in a way that I thought was satisfying. Like, it didn't all come. I knocked over Cap. It didn't conclude in a way I found completely satisfying, and sort of stalled in the middle. So I still really enjoyed it, but not it wasn't perfect, I'll say. Then we have my favorite. This is my gold standard, Saga. So Saga is another Brian K. Vaughan series. It's ongoing. I think it had a long hiatus sort of around the pandemic, but it started back up, luckily. And I think they needed a break because they were going kind of nonstop on it for years. So Saga is a big science fiction space opera. It's got comedy and drama and romance, tragedy. It's excellent. I love the characters. I love the art. I love the universe that they build out. And it's sort of hard to explain, but just know that it's a beautiful, beautiful story, and I love it. Speaking of Saga, we have 2 of my favorite little critters from Saga. So this is Gus. He's a little seal, and he'll use that axe. Or is it a scythe? Who's to say? But he's a good little guy. This is a Funko Pop I bought off eBay. And he's fuzzy. He's got this like flocked finish. And he's got his little onesie with the butt flap. And he's so cute. He's so stinking cute. And then we have one of my other favorite characters. This is Lying Cat. She's sort of the, not sidekick, but she works with a bounty hunter named the Will. And she can detect when people are lying, and the only thing she can say is lying when someone's lying. And she's incredible, and I love her. And she's a little Sphinx cat. Really, in the books, she's a big Sphinx cat. She's like the size of a pony, and she's wonderful. So that's Saga. I love Saga. Another Brian K. Vaughan one. This is a standalone called We Stand on Guard, which is sort of strange. The premise of this is that Canada and the U.S. go to war. Sort of an interesting what-if type story. Moving on from that, we have a series that I picked up and never kind of continued with. and the title has escaped me. The Wicked and the Divine. So the premise of this is that new gods, old gods still exist, but as celebrities. And it's a really interesting premise, a lot of fun, but not one I managed to keep up with. It's one I've wanted to kind of go back to, but I don't know, just haven't had the motivation. Beside that, we have my Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics. So these are the Boom Comics run. So you might be familiar with the Dark Horse versions, which carry on from the show. So it's like continues the canon of the television series. But these are a reboot. So this starts essentially from season 1 of the show and reinvents it in a modern setting and changes some things. So the first few issues were exactly what I wanted at the time. You know, what I wanted from a Buffy story. They were exactly the vibe that I hoped they'd be. And then they sort of petered out. They sort of, you know, the plot stagnated. It was really, the storytelling was super unclear. It really lost it for me. But that first volume here really holds a special place for me. So this is one I definitely dropped, and all the reviews that I've seen for the comics since then have not made me want to keep reading, so unfortunate, but that's how it goes. Then we have this like one-off volume called Spell on Wheels. It's about some witches and a revenge plot that they take on a man who slighted them. Very fun. Beside that, we have these little independently published comics. I'm just going to move Scooby-Doo out of the way so we can see. These are the Death Wish comics, and these are inspired by My Chemical Romance. So it's based on the members of My Chemical Romance. They're fictionalized versions of them, and the story is like a supernatural, otherworldly type story where the guys from My Chemical Romance, as young people in New Jersey, so they're not in a band, they're just, you know, working at like a comic book shop or working at a hospital, and they uncover something otherworldly and sort of find themselves thrust into this world where they need to essentially save the world. It's a ton of fun. I really love these really talented artists and writers. It's two young MCR fans who you know, are writing and creating this comic at the same time they're going to like school, like they're university art students. Really impressive stuff. And I think the 5th volume was just released, and I'm waiting for Canada Post to finish the strike before I order because I don't want it to get stuck. So yeah, really love these series. They're a ton of fun. Next, beside that, we have V for Vendetta, the Alan Moore comic. So very famous. I bought this because I've seen the movie so many times, and I love the movie that I wanted to get into the comic a little bit. They are very different though, and I think that put me off a little bit, but still one I think worth checking out. Next to that, we have Mouse, Volume 1 and 2. Excellent graphic novel by Art Spiegelman. It's about World War II and his father's experiences in World War II as a Jewish man. It's heavy, but it's so worth the read. It's just really riveting story. Next up, we have Nimona by N.D. Stevenson. Ton of fun, really excellent graphic novel. This is one that I read online when it was a web series. I was a fan of it then, and then when they got it published, I thought that was so cool, so I have a copy of it here. Recently made into a Netflix movie that was really good, really excellent. Next up, we have Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. She is the creator of the Bechdel test, if you didn't know. This is sort of a partial memoir of her life growing up with her father, who sort of had an odd relationship with, and there's a lot about sort of her sexuality and questioning his sexuality at the time, because I think her parents were separated or her mom had died or something, and sort of dealing with the idea of her father and who her father really was, and how much you know your family kind of thing. So really interesting memoir. Here we have Heartstopper by Alice Osman, another excellent Netflix adaptation. Really, they're very cute stories. Like, they're just very cute graphic novels. Lovely, lovely coming of age romance. Some tough subject matter too, but it's very sweet and just wholesome, and I love them. Then we have Lore Olympus. So this is another one that I read as a web series, and it's still an ongoing web series. I have fallen behind, admittedly. So early on I thought, oh, I should purchase them. I love this series so much. I should have the hard copies. But there's so many chapters to Lore Olympus, and each one of these only holds maybe 30 chapters, and they're on like well over 200 now, so I don't think it's practical for me to buy them all, but I do like having them. I love this story. It's a Hades Persephone retelling, and it's so good. I love them so much. Beside that, we have Complete Persepolis. This is another memoir graphic novel. Really, really incredible. I highly recommend checking it out. And then, if we scoot Darth Maul out of the way, here we have Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley. So he's also the author of Scott Pilgrim. And this is an excellent graphic novel. It's about essentially a woman who's a chef who discovers a way to essentially change her life. Essentially wishes on some magic mushrooms and things change for her. But it's sort of one of those be careful what you wish for stories. Excellent, excellent novel. And then Fangs by Sarah Anderson. Really, really fun. I'll try and pull it out here. Really, really fun little vignettes about a vampire and a werewolf who are in a relationship. And it's just so beautiful and so lovely. It has this nice cloth bound. And it's just a lovely, lovely book. And very cute. Really good for like a spooky season kind of read. Let's put Darth Maul back where he belongs. He likes to hang out there. So I am going to end it here, and we'll do a part 3 for the remaining 2 shelves here. And maybe I'll pull out those books that I have hiding away. But I hope you have a lovely evening, and that you found maybe a book or two to add to your list. Good night.